December 6th, 1933. The Prohibition Party moves to set up a new chapter in the still dry state of Oklahoma. After 13 years, the national ban on alcohol has just come to an end, putting the party in shambles. But the country is joyous, particularly Chicago, where patrons of the Palmer Hotel drink 50 cases of whiskey, 25 cases of scotch, 75 of wine and champagne, as well as 20 barrels of beer. In D.C., President Roosevelt rings in the return to beverage normalcy with a martini. But the Prohibition Party maintains that America has just made an enormous mistake. In Oklahoma City, National Party Secretary Edwin E. Blake assures a meeting of loyalists that it's only a matter of time before Prohibition is reinstated. The party claims that Blake's righteous speech is received enthusiastically before a mass meeting. But as an AP reporter later discovers, the mass meeting in question consists of 11 people. Welcome to the Vanquished. Anders J. Lee here with my co-host, Freddie G.
So happy to be here.
And we got a melange of guests. Am I using that word correctly? Probably not. We got a variety of guests. We have 3 guests, 2 of whom are from the Well, There's Your Problem podcast. We have Roz.
Hello.
And Liam.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us from across the highway in Philadelphia. And we also have in my apartment, the one and only Naomi Karavani.
Yeah, serving as tech support and also the female perspective.
Yeah. Very important. I mean, we're very progressive in this household, which is why Naomi sets up all the tech, including this arm. We're subverting gender roles and having a straight man who's completely incompetent when it comes to all things technical, but this is a special episode today. So far, we've covered candidates who have lost for the presidency, and we will be doing that today. But we're branching out a little bit to talk about the third oldest party in the United States of America. Who could that be? The one and only Prohibition Party.
Oh, I was going with the Anti-Saloon Party. Yep.
Too bad they're not still around. I wonder what they would think of Biden.
Oh, dude, hang on. They got to still be around. There's got to still be one guy, right?
But Biden can't be a Mason because he's Catholic.
Nope. Ceased operations 1888. Motherfucker.
Now it's probably just people who are really big fans of George Washington University, whoever the George Mason rival is in the NCAA. So I thought about drinking for this podcast, but instead decided, instead of drinking, I want to get the full Prohibition temperance movement experience. I just gave myself a hangover. So I got drunk last night and am podcasting the day after. And I think I'm for banning alcohol now.
Mm-hmm. 2 shots of tequila.
Hangovers like that.
Yeah.
Well, the proper form for early American drinking is you binged so hard on basically free whiskey that you get the DTs the next day. So, you're actually pretty far off from where you need to be.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for me, I mean, I quit drinking like 5 years ago, but like I hate Prohibition, and like this is the only, if I ever went back in time, this is the only time I would drink because it looks like the most fun time. And also, you just got to drink at this time for freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And also because you will get all sorts of diseases you've never heard of from the water.
Yeah.
Stuff we eradicated like 130 years ago.
Right.
I am drinking a beer right now because I have contempt for Prohibition.
I am drinking one of those white monsters and a Waterloo sparkling water black cherry. But this weekend I'm going to be I will be the anti-prohibition party, or I'll be the Prohibition Party in that I'll drink so much I'll make it illegal to drink. There won't be any alcohol left.
I mean, maybe that's the solution to the would have been a better solution to the nation's problems, is just have one person take on the share of all the alcohol and prevent anyone else from doing it.
Yeah, the pariah, the booze pariah.
That was actually a strategy the Hudson Bay Company used to maintain sobriety amongst the local Native American populations, where they were doing the most fur trapping, was to buy all the booze.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so this goes all the way back to the beginning. Alcohol is a part of the country in a way that I guess I wasn't totally aware of, because I always think of America as being not a super alcoholic country compared to other ones. I feel like that, I mean, there's the drinking stereotype is so loose it can be used for basically any ethnicity. Like my mom, her family's Irish, and when she started dating my dad, he's Norwegian, and her mom, who's 100% Irish woman, had rickets and was very Irish. She was like, the Norwegians, they drink a lot, So like I guess so. I mean, everybody has that stereotype about everybody, but I always thought of America as relatively off the sauce. But as Roz was telling me, you read The Alcoholic Republic a couple times, and this was a major problem in the early stages of the United States.
Yeah, so during the colonial period and really up until about, let's say, 1830 or so, it's a problem. It's a big issue. Let's say you had a friend and that friend goes through, a fifth of whiskey every 2 days. Today, that would be something that maybe you would want to intervene with, say, hey man, this is unsustainable, you shouldn't do that. Back then it would be like, damn, this is moderate healthful drinking. Essentially there's a lot of factors that sort of lead into this. We don't actually figure out that alcohol is harmful until about 1770. Benjamin Rush figures this out. Another fun fact that we don't find out until about 1820 that wine and beer contain alcohol.
It was.
That's why mead was for breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. So, the United States has a lot of situations in the beginning that really encourage lots and lots of alcohol consumption. So we start out sort of in New England with rum, right? Because there's lots of molasses being imported. Molasses is a byproduct from sugarcane production and the horrible meat grinders that were the West Indies colonies.
Right.
You distill that into rum. Rum is this nice source of, it's an alcoholic beverage. People like to drink it. It's also a stable commodity that holds value, which is very important because the colonies are fundamentally, they're extractive. That means they export a lot of stuff to England, and England does not import a lot of hard currency, right? So it's the foundation of a barter system as well as a beverage. So rum is everywhere. Right. Rum is like the first iteration of this. And rum, there's pretty heavy rum consumption everywhere. I mean, if you work on the docks in Boston or somewhere like that, you wake up, you have a dram of rum for your constitution. You have a second dram for right before you go to work. You have a morning break, have some more rum. Lunch, more rum. Yeah, afternoon break, rum. Go to the tavern after work, more rum. Get home, have some rum before you go to bed. And just rinse and repeat, right?
Mm-hmm. When was Roz, do you know off the top of your head when the black tot was?
I do not know.
Okay.
What is the black tot?
So the tot was the daily rum ration given to British sailors well into the 1970s. From 1866 to 1970, it was 1/8 of an imperial pint of rum at 95.5 proof given out at midday. They stopped this in 1970.
Well.
I know that the U.S. Navy was half a pint of rum, so we're talking, what is that? What's a pint? 16 ounces. So 8 ounces of rum a day until 1842.
Damn,
that was on the low side.
Yeah, that's why they were some I guess some sailors were happy to be impressed by the British Navy.
No, you got less rum.
Yeah, but it's better. I guarantee you, it's better rum. If I can talk real quick about the Whiskey Rebellion too.
Sure.
So, for those of you not familiar, the Whiskey Rebellion is basically a protest against a tax levied against distilled spirits intended to pay back Revolutionary War debt, and farmers literally rebel, and Washington puts this down in, I believe, 1794. And that obviously have been very unpopular because this is on the Western frontier. People are taking the excess corn, barley, wheat, etc., to distill whiskey, and so basically the government says, "Well, fuck you, we're gonna tax it," and this leads to what is genuinely like a crisis in Western Pennsylvania, March on Pittsburgh, all that sort of shit. We can talk about that forever.
Yep. Well, this is the second crisis. This is the second situation that leads to a lot of drinking, especially out west, but also in eastern markets. At some point, especially the other European West Indies start to distill rum in their own country as opposed to in their own colony as opposed to shipping into the United States. And in the meantime, we have westward expansion. People start to settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. The soil is much richer out there. You have much higher crop yields, but we resisted investment into internal improvements, right? Canals, well, at this point, mostly canals, some roads, there's not much of that there. So you have these massive surpluses of grain, mostly corn, some barley, some wheat, whatever, but mostly corn. And it's like, you can't transport it to market in any practical way other than distilling it. You also have no hard cash because there's some banks out there. They're all crooked. They all go bankrupt immediately because none of them have reserves of gold coins. We let the Bank of the United States explode twice.
Yeah, thanks for nothing, Andrew Jackson, you son of a bitch.
Exactly.
Oh,
So
God,
this
yeah.
essentially means that you are distilling huge amounts of whiskey constantly, like everyone is, and you are using this basically as currency. It's the only thing that holds value is whiskey. There's nothing else. You have whiskey, you have salt pork, you have corn. Those are the three things that you have out west. Nothing else.
Washington at one point is the largest distiller of spirits in the Americas.
That didn't last. People got way bigger.
Yeah, but
That's
at one
George.
point, I just want to point that out, dickhead.
Yeah.
Sure.
I did want to say, basically alcohol taxes is like the biggest part of the government's revenue, pretty much from the beginning with this whiskey tax, and then all the way up till Prohibition even, and they have to actually find another source of taxes if they want to ban alcohol.
Well, it's a big issue that, the only way you could pay this tax was through hard currency. You didn't have that. The only thing you could pay the whiskey tax in was in more whiskey. How does that work?
We had basically... up until 1812, we relied basically exclusively on import tariffs, which, that's not...
Whiskey was very necessary because that was the only practical way to get your crop to eastern markets overland. Because if you tried to just ship, bulk corn on a horse and cart,
kill the horse and cart.
it was worth less than the amount of feed for the horse. So you had to ship the whiskey out east, and your other option was to ship it down the river to New Orleans. Those were your two options. And sending it out east as whiskey, that had higher profit margins. So, but you also meant that there's huge amounts of whiskey around all the time.
And you also, at this point in America and the world, had nothing to do. There was no Game Boys. Nobody had phones. Maybe some
It's just dire
weird
diphtheria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the fun, is to, maybe issue some hooting and hollering at little dance halls or whatever, but which was illegal in some places. But this is from the beginning. Mayflower brought over beer. As you said, George Washington made his own beer. John Adams drank cider every day. And during the Constitutional Convention, all the founding fathers were shit-faced. And water
Explains a lot.
Yeah, as we'll see, they get some do-overs later. But water is also not very safe in the U.S. So, I think it's safer to drink beer than just. I don't know if they have an equivalent to tap water, but
generally speaking, there were sources of pure water available. They were just inconvenient. You would have to haul it up in buckets to your house and store it somewhere. You could gather water in cisterns from rainwater. You could do all that sort of stuff. But some people were paranoid about water actually being unhealthy. There were reports that one traveler reported that he had heard of 8 deaths in Philadelphia from cold water alone in the past week. So people thought it was deadly, even though it usually wasn't. So people turned to mostly drinks like cider, of course, whiskey and rum. The upper class had wine. Beer is not a going concern in the United States until the 1840s, and doesn't really pick up until the 1870s. Beer is very, very uncommon. It's very expensive because it's very difficult to make compared to distilled spirits or wine or cider or something like that. In the 1800 the antebellum period, it will cost you more for a bottle of beer than a pint of whiskey.
Interesting. Yeah. And you have the average American by 1830 is drinking 1.8 bottles of 90 proof liquor per week. So it becomes a going concern in the country. And you have the beginnings of a temperance movement. People are concerned about the intake of alcohol. It's women in particular are concerned. The proto women's suffrage movement is we're getting beat up by our husbands sometimes when they have too much to drink, and the talk of prohibition begins, and it's from the beginning. It seems like it's kind of a city versus country thing.
It's also not so much the amount of drink; it's the style of drinking that changes.
Right.
Because in sort of in the 18th century, where you're steadily drinking a huge amount of liquor, but over the course of the whole day, I mean, you're buzzed the whole day, but that's a little more sustainable. In the 1820s, the 1830s, there's these massive societal changes. There's all these new professions. There's all this sort of, changes in status. People start to go from a culture of, hey, I have my purpose in life. I'm a stevedore. I'm a craftsman. I'm a whatever. To oh my God, everything's changing. I'm going to go drink a quart of whiskey in a night. So binging becomes a thing. Binging is the huge thing in the 1820s and 1830s. Is people will be sober for a week, 2 weeks, and they say, I can't take it anymore, and then they just go crazy. Yeah.
This is even Ulysses S. Grant during the Civil War was like this. When there were battles going on, he wouldn't drink, and then they'd have a break, or they'd be doing a siege, and he just gets crazy drunk.
My favorite thing about that is if you read the oh my God, I'm in the middle of it right now, but the Chernow biography.
The Chernow?
Yeah, where he does this weird thing where he's just Grant didn't drink that much. He did the same thing with Hamilton, where he was well, he felt bad about owning slaves, and it's yeah, but he's still guys, that's not really a scholarly thing. I'm in the middle of it, and they're just my favorite part of that is the people who are I never saw Grant drink, and then the other people who are I saw the man so fucking knocked down drunk.
Look, on average, only a little tipsy.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the people who said that were Robert E. Lee and his acolytes trying to spread.
Well, I think it's worth noting that they say, I mean, not that Ron Chernow's the best biographer in the world, but he does mention that like he doesn't really drink around his wife, and it may be that societal norms are changing. That's kind of conjecture more than anything, but like the idea of being knocked down, dragged out drunk in front of your wife is starting to get bad. And I remember, I don't know if I can't see it in the notes, but there's a labor movement for prohibition at some point too.
Yeah.
In the IWW that gets real weird. Oh yeah, it's right here. I missed it.
Yeah, they support it. Yeah, it was in the Ken Burns though.
In some ways, the 1700s, sort of steadily drinking through the day, though drinking more thing. It was just healthier, It was than what came afterwards.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how the temperance prohibition can really be a very progressive thing at points or a very reactionary thing at points. The real spike comes before, I think, one of the first big waves of immigration from Europe, but alcoholism is seen as like an immigrant problem, even though in reality it's just been a quote unquote native white American problem.
Yeah, the Germans and the Irish. Yeah.
It's the most American thing you can do.
Government is the most American thing you can do.
And the beer industry is entirely German, and that becomes an issue because right when they're ramping up prohibition, we're at war with Germany, and that's not good for the brewers.
Yeah. No more Schlitz for us.
Yeah, we invented good beer in 1840, or rather the Czechs invented good beer in 1840, and that was pretty rapidly imported to the United States, but that still stays. Most breweries, unfortunately, they're pretty local because it's difficult to sell beer before it goes bad. You don't have any useful refrigeration, and it's still the spirits are cheaper. Eventually the Germans come in with lager yeast, which makes fermenting easier, and it makes the beer spoil a little less quickly. And that's sort of how beer makes inroads in the United States. I also think the Union Army had lager rations. So that definitely introduced a large part of the country to beer as an idea of something you could drink, as opposed to before when beer is like the most low class thing imaginable.
Yeah, and there is kind of like a bit of a pause or a lull for the temperance movement during the Civil War, because leading up to that, you have the Knights Templar in the 1850s who say that the original knights who fought in the Crusade were anti-alcohol, and they themselves drank sour milk, which doesn't sound very appetizing, doesn't sound like a good libation for the cognitive experience. Or
sour milk, but not fermented.
I guess, yeah.
Okay.
That's not good for you. Don't do that.
That's bad. Don't attempt to recreate this.
Yes.
I mean, that's what killed Zachary Taylor, I think, was sour milk. But for the Civil War, it's like, we're fighting. People can get drunk a little bit, right? It's a traumatic experience. Have a cow, have a drink. But after that, let's get serious. And in the late 1860s, the Knights Templar, their international organization, they start to say, let's support some political parties. And at first, this is seems like, it's always ideologically kind of all over the place, but it seems like it's kind of an outgrowth of the abolitionist movement in a sense, because you have a lot of former abolitionists who are now like, okay, what's the next big thing?
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
What else is slavery?
Yeah. Let's ban alcohol.
Yeah.
We couldn't imagine a world without slaves just 50 years ago, and a world without alcohol seems unthinkable now. But we're gonna make it happen.
A lot of early prohibitionists also tried to go farther. They were like, well, let's also ban consumption of meat, for instance, not on the grounds of like animal rights, but on the grounds that it's bad for you somehow. This is somehow adversely affecting people's temperament. By eating animals, it turns man into an animal, something like that. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was like a number of progressive causes that came out of the abolition movement. There was like women's suffrage, and prohibition was like, the prohibitionists were part of that activist community.
Right. So by 1871, they're forming a party, the Prohibition Party. There's, a lot of back and forth, particularly on women's issues, because a lot of or feminists want to make this part of the women's movement, temperance, and then there are other people who are like, no, I'm in it for the religious reasons or whatever, and they don't necessarily want that. So there's some back and forth. There's a prohibition home protection party, which is named as kind of a deal. And by 1872, they have a president and vice president who are nominated, but they are chosen the year before. And that's actually something that continues in the modern era. So the current round, the candidates in 2024 were selected in 2023, which kind of seems like it's maybe not a bad idea that you have like a whole year of being like the front runners. Because in theory, like you're supposed to be selected at a convention, and that's like only a few months before the general election. So maybe it makes more sense for everybody to do that. It's like you figure out your candidates the year before the election.
I get why that's smart. I also the prohibition people are just huge nerds. Like they're people, they get up early. They're like, it's like New Year's Eve, 2023. They're like, well, why haven't we picked a candidate yet for 2024? Like, it's just, this is the least cool political
Do
part.
political campaigns really need to be longer?
Yeah. I do want to say a word about how they chose home protection. A lot of the women's suffrage movement, they wanted to appeal to conservatives and like women who were at home. And so they tried to make this a cause that would appeal to everyone.
Right.
Well, I also want to talk about real quick, Carrie Nation, who's a very famous prohibitionist.
Yes.
Also establishes basically what you could call a prototypical domestic violence shelter for wives and children of alcoholics in Kansas City, which I learned about in my social work training. But so there is some humanity to this. It's just like, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
She is awesome. Carrie Nation's awesome because she would take an axe and go like smash up breweries.
Fuck you, Kansas.
Yeah. Didn't they say, oh, you were damaging the bar? And she was like, no, I was trying to destroy it.
Yeah.
But a hatchet that just says death to rum. which I believe is how Ross felt his freshman year of college.
I'm not a big liquor guy. It does bad things to me.
Yeah, I know.
Now that's like the only thing I get. If I have a beer, I just fall asleep. But to each his own, I guess. But this party is sort of, I would call them like proto-Bryanite, because William Jennings Bryan, he's coming around in like the 1890s. So they're a little bit, even before him, they are for sort of like progressive economic causes, for the direct election of senators, but probably less racist than William Jennings Bryan. But there's, the Home Protection Party. And then in the 1880s, they have a governor of Kansas, John St. John, who is I guess their first elected official, and manages to ban alcohol in Kansas. And this is really when it's getting started. The Civil War's over. We have a few states that are starting to ban alcohol. He becomes the Prohibition nominee in 1884. He's walking one day and somebody tries to shoot him and they hit a window next to him. And I don't know if that was a drunkard who missed because they were drunk or something, but
proves my point, asshole.
Yeah. He survives, and he increases the party's vote share by over 100,000, but he's then blamed for throwing the 1884 election to Grover Cleveland, and then back home in Kansas, he is burned in effigy. because they're a Republican state and they're mad that Cleveland is now the president. And later on, John St. John will go out to California and basically start a commune for sober people, which does not sound very fun. But this is, kind of the utopian era where people would form in communes left and right all over the place.
Yeah, imagine sharing wives sober.
This is the compromise. This is the compromise. All those sober people, they can go live somewhere else.
Yeah. If you don't want to be around it, hey, yeah. But then we have 1880s Susanna Salter, who's the mayor of Argonia, Kansas. I know, Freddie, you read a little bit about her.
Oh yeah, I love her. Yeah, so they put her up as a joke. They're like, let's nominate this woman. We won't even tell it. She didn't even try to run. They're like, then she'll lose and we'll prove that women can't win. But on election day, she finds out she's running and she's like, yeah, I'll do it. And everyone's like, well, she's better than whoever else we're going to vote for. So she wins the election and becomes the first female mayor in American history.
Oops.
Can she vote for herself? Is she allowed to?
I would say there's no way they had women's suffrage in Kansas. No, she can't. I think she just tells people that she's down.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she lived until 1961 and died 2 weeks before her 101st birthday.
Baby's living sober works. No.
But again,
alcohol is very bad for you. I think that as someone who is personally an alcoholic, it's not good for you.
Yeah, I mean that's the trade-off: is you get to live to 101, but you're also in Norman, Oklahoma.
Yes,
Sooners, baby.
Yeah, but can you talk a little bit about why did they decide to make a party rather than just try to influence the parties to have a prohibition platform?
So I think those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, because you have like the Liberty Party in the mid 19th century that is anti-slavery. They're also blamed. We talked about the Henry Clay episode. They're blamed for throwing an election, but they never get much power, but they're able to do exactly that, influence the major party. They get the Republicans to form, and they're not as radical explicitly, but they take up that cause and end up ending slavery. So I think it's kind of that situation. And throughout their history, as we'll see, there's kind of a back and forth with involvement in the major parties. But I think for most of their existence, really, there's not a set plank in either party, because there are constituencies in both the Democrat and Republican parties that want prohibition, and other constituencies that don't want it. So they're kind of like they're rock solid on it, and so they will work with the parties, but they want their independent ballot line just to keep that as a priority.
And let me add, Naomi, good point, because basically the dirty secret of the Prohibition Party is they aren't really the ones who got Prohibition enacted.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really the Anti Saloon League, which is a single interest group. And they basically just influence both parties and just stage manage the whole thing. So that's why I like the Prohibition Party. Like, they didn't get Prohibition done. Then Prohibition's gone. It's never coming back. And they're like, oh, yeah, we still exist. And then they've just kept existing as fewer and fewer people vote for them.
Right.
Yeah. But I also think part of the Prohibition parties, like raison d'etre, was like after the Civil War, they were like both parties are bitterly divided. The Republicans are in the North, Democrats in the South. Like, the only thing that will unite the country is a hatred of liquor. And like Frances Willard, one of the most powerful people in the Temperance Union, she tried to lobby Jefferson Davis after the Civil War to endorse a referendum in Texas. And there was a photograph of him accepting like a temperance pin from Francis Willard, and then he had to come out in public and say like, no, I'm actually, again, nobody's taking your mint juleps, don't worry.
Yeah.
I mean, he's known for losing, and they're like, well, at least we got him.
We got the best loser.
Yeah, but I think there were a lot of, Southern, formerly Confederate officials who were pro-prohibition because they didn't like the idea of the freedmen getting the right to vote and getting the right to drink.
Yeah.
It was the 1884
Absolutely.
election where I believe the slogan "Rum, Romanism, and Rebellion" is used to basically go after Roman Catholic immigrants, the South, and alcohol.
But yeah, I mean, on the third party point, you have other parties around this time, 1880s, 1890s, that are sort of grappling with the same questions. And like, do we fuse? And they think about joining up with like the populists and others, but they, surprise, surprise, can't really agree on the platform, because really the only uniting force for the Prohibition Party is prohibition, and they have like hard right members, they have hard left members. And then meanwhile, you have by 1896 the People's Party just giving its nomination to Bryan in exchange for supporting bimetallism, which the Prohibition Party officially supports as well. And 1890s, you also have the Anti Saloon League forming. And there's a distinction between a tavern and a saloon that I learned about. Was that a tavern is where you sit down, I think, and then a saloon is like what made it so radical is that people were standing and schmoozing and drinking, and that was like
Standing up. There's some doors, a pair of double doors, but they're only like waist high. You kick it in, you've got some like gallery style second floor mezzanine. That when there's a big fight, you kick someone into one of the posts, it falls down. Yeah, you got a cabaret show.
All right.
So the saloons, it's a big thing for like organizing immigrant communities in cities. Everyone could gather there. You could all be vote for the same ticket there. Like the saloon owner was like a powerful guy. Sometimes you would just sell your vote for like a bar tab or like a buck.
Now, man.
This was also a very common thing for campaigning in like the antebellum period, was that the candidate would just put on a huge like campaign rally and give everyone free whiskey. And then you voted for whichever candidate had the better whiskey.
Is this how Sherelle Parker became mayor of Philadelphia? She gave you guys.
I wish.
Opposite of that.
Well,
Voting for Lefroy.
There used to be like 4 times as many polling places in Philly, and they were all in neighborhood bars.
Really?
Yeah.
When was this?
That not too long ago, like the 80s, I want to say.
It's Always Sunny bar. Was that a polling place?
It's in Los Angeles, but probably.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and this goes back to like the left-right thing, because a lot of the people who wanted to ban alcohol were worried about trade unions, because that's where they would meet, in saloons. They would, the working class people having a pint, talking about workplace issues. And then you also have little, limits on alcohol. I think in New York, drinking was banned on Sundays, and it wasn't enforced for a while. And then Teddy Roosevelt becomes police commissioner, and he just starts enforcing it. And all the immigrants are mad because they have to work every other day of the week. So this is their one day to just chill at the bar, and he's taking it away. But he is, he has a weird comment he makes about Irish saloon owners, it's very common for rich people to drink, but they look down on poor people doing it, and that's how some of the propaganda comes, like we talked about earlier with immigrants drinking. This is sort of almost a eugenic issue. It's a degenerate activity when you're drinking like poor people liquor, but the rich, the wine and stuff, that's all fine. It's just
that's all fine. That's we only found out that there was alcohol in it in 1820, and that might not be right. Those guys cracked that.
So what did you think? Like, what did they think was happening when they would drink it? They just like they have the effects of alcohol, but it doesn't count.
It's sort of like that. It's a lot of denial. Some people might have thought that there was some chemical reaction that happened when you distilled wine that produced alcohol, but we didn't have a great understanding of chemistry yet. You know, the Enlightenment wasn't even finished yet. So it was sort of like, well, something in the distillation process produces alcohol rather than the alcohol already being present in the solution. I guess would have been the understanding.
Interesting.
I would also say like people might have a high tolerance if they maybe drank like hard liquor, and then the beer only has like 2%, so it might not have really felt like that much to them.
You're still largely doing 5% beer. 2% beer is like more of a
whatever it's called,
kombucha.
Like you're like small beer or your third runnings.
There we go.
But small beer is. You know, that is not super common as like the beer that actually makes it to market, because that's just, it's not good. It's bad.
Agreed.
Yeah. But in the mid 1890s, there's kind of a schism in the Prohibition Party. There's two factions of gaugers. There's broad gaugers who want a comprehensive. Yeah, they want to look like Skrillex, and then the narrow gaugers just want a subtle, more tasteful type of gauge. The narrow ones want just alcohol prohibition in the platform, which makes sense. But the broad gaugers are like, no, we have to appeal to more people, and so we have to actually take stances on other issues. But the narrow gaugers win out, and there's a split. There's a national party that's formed with the broad gaugers. The vote just gets diluted on both ends, and then eventually the broad gaugers come back into the fold, and the party the narrow gaugers relent a little bit and make the party more progressive overall and take up some other issues.
I just thought the terminology here was interesting because this is simultaneous with this sort of narrow gauge fever that grips the nation in terms of railroads, where, you know, there was all this domestic and foreign capital that was invested into like thousands of narrow gauge railroads, all of which were absolute shit and went from nowhere to nowhere, you know, and were ripped up in 10 years.
We were going to get that.
Yeah. But yeah, narrow gauge, bad idea. Don't do it, folks.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, so the National Party, that's the name of the one that like the progressive prohibition people start. That's also a name of a different party a few years later of pro-war socialists who get kicked out of the Socialist Party for, you know, wanting to be fighting World War One. But it's a different party with the same name, and they kind of they have a separate appeal to prohibition people, but they have a 1912 candidate, Eugene Wilder Chafin, who this is, to paraphrase him, he said, there's an outrage that we had a civil war over chattel slavery, but not the bondage of alcohol. So that's how he's looking at it. Like, people are dependent, they're a slave to this substance, and we have to free them. And then 2 years later, they elect their first congressional candidate, Charles Randall, to Congress, 1914. He is anti-war, so he votes against it in 18, but then loses in 1920. And then, you know, there's it's interesting because he's nominated there's like fusion voting in a lot of places, and it's common for different parties to nominate the same guy. So he's also nominated by the Democrats and the Socialists. And then in the 1920s, he almost almost runs as the vice presidential candidate for the American Party, which is at that time the political wing of the KKK. So yeah,
Wow.
these people are like all over the place. There's a lot of I guess it probably just is weird for the modern eye, but ideology is relatively scrambled back then.
Yes.
I do like that they do prohibition in 1919. It gets passed around then, and then he's like, "Oh man, we did it," and they're like, "Okay, now you're not in Congress anymore."
Yeah, right. That was a big lull. That created a big lull for the party, which we'll get to in a second. But meanwhile, the nation is half dry during the Wilson administration. It's around World War I. States are banning alcohol, and there's talk of making it a federal issue, but maybe they should have just stuck with that, just doing it on the state and local level, which is kind of at various times that's what they've claimed they want, is just for states to decide. But they also have a candidate who wins in 1916 for governor of Florida. He does win as a Prohibition Party candidate, but he had also run for the Democratic nomination, and he won on the first ballot for the nomination. But there's a new rule because of William Jennings Bryan, basically, that you have to count other rounds, essentially. And because of that, someone else gets a Democratic nomination, goes to the Florida Supreme Court. They rule, Katz, you're not the Democratic nominee. So he blames the Catholics, and then teams up with the Prohibition Party, and they get him elected governor. So they have their guy in him, and they have a lot of fair weather, like people who are with them for a little bit are kind of politicos, and then are like, this is stupid. He does some stuff with like prison reform in Florida, but he's not a very major figure, and they don't really, parlay him into like a national candidate for whatever reason.
Florida is not a major state in 1916.
Yeah.
No.
It's
Right.
a swamp.
Florida is not a good place to be.
Place to be, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, it went through ebbs and flows, but yeah, definitely not. They were developing land.
We got Jacksonville, we got St. Augustine, and then we got Gators. Nothing but Gators. Just solid Gators for like 300 miles.
Gator-based infrastructure.
Yeah.
Well, they did have around that time was William Jennings Bryan moved to Jacksonville, I think, in the 20th century at some point. And the Prohibition, because he's he's against alcohol, thinks it's immoral.
That's never a good way to start a story. As well, I moved to Jacksonville, and
but they try to get this Jacksonville resident, William Jennings Bryan, to be the Prohibition nominee in 1916 via telegram, but he says no thanks. Which is, yeah.
No one goes to his house?
I guess not.
The man's house.
You had to.
knock on the door.
Florida.
We had to traverse a swamp to get down there. You lived in the middle of a bayou.
For having me.
No. The railroad stopped in Jacksonville. Then you traversed the swamp.
Liam's got to take off. Thank you, Liam, for joining us.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, have a good one.
Right.
But yeah, so 1916, William Jennings Bryan. I mean, he lives on an alligator, so it's hard to get to his home address. So they telegram him. He says no thanks. Probably a smart move on his part, because he gets to become, well, he has already been Secretary of State at that point, but the flag at that point is kind of scary. It's like the American flag, but the blue part of it is a cross.
It's a cross, yes.
Yeah, very intimidating.
I love this flag, and it has all 48 stars. I just love this flag. It is scary. It is kind of KKK-ish, but I don't know. I love it.
Yeah. And then, as you referenced, 1919 rolls around, and you have the big P. They actually pass Prohibition. Freddie, how did this happen?
I mean, the Anti Saloon League just keeps getting more and more people under their power. Like at one point, like in Ohio, they're doing these local option laws where like parts of the state can ban alcohol, which is how half the country became dry. And the governor in Ohio pushes against it, and they they topple him, and then it's like, okay, you can't mess with them, and they basically become like AIPAC is now with the politicians, where like you can't go against them even if you know it's what they're saying is stupid. And then during World War I, there's a lot of build up against the Germans. The breweries are really powerful. They own the saloons. They own the entire industry of beer distribution. They're very much like McDonald's today. And then there are a bunch of Germans, and people are like, let's take away their power. Let's not waste alcohol. Let's not waste grain from the war, even though it wasn't a significant amount. But let's not waste grain from the war. And things just really move towards dryness.
I just wanted to comment on the thing being like McDonald's. You get your Tide House pub, which almost is non-existent these days, but you would have a contract between a brewery and a tavern or a pub or a saloon, and would say, all right, you can only serve our beer here. You can actually see this a lot in Chicago still. They still got like a lot of these Tide Houses would have a big terracotta Schlitz logo above the door. There's a whole bunch of those still left.
Interesting.
It is like when you go to the Met game and you can only get either Pepsi or Coke, and it's like, so they still do that with soft drinks. So a big problem with Prohibition before it started was, where are we going to get the revenue? 70% of the federal revenue, there's no income tax at this point, is from alcohol. So spoiler alert, the progressives do the income tax, and the Anti Saloon League definitely supports that. And then once they have the income tax, well, at least then financially they could ban alcohol. And then they are eventually able to do it. Like I said, towards the end of World War I. And they don't give them that much time to ratify it, the amendment, but it ends up becoming the quickest ratified amendment up to that point. And the wording of the amendment is vague enough where people might have thought that beer and wine were okay.
Beer and wine would be fine. Yeah, this was a lot of like more moderate supporters of Prohibition were like, we're going after the hard liquor, the beer and wine, that's fine. Don't worry about that. The hard liquor is the problem.
Yeah. And you have like personal use, which now it's interesting that today the Prohibition Party people will be like, instead of being like, oh, well, we do it a little differently, or they should have done it differently. Some of them say that, but they also say like, oh, well, it's misunderstood because back then what we were really after was commercial alcohol sales, and like personal use we were okay with, which is kind of a weird position to take, but they before national prohibition went into place, half the country was banned, but the other half it wasn't. So it was fairly easy to get alcohol across state lines. So this is kind of a way of preventing that. But I still don't know if there's really any way to have done this where it would have worked. Do you guys think? There's like a counterfactual where prohibition works?
Well, the issue is that alcohol just occurs naturally, constantly, everywhere.
Yeah.
It would be like trying to. It's impossible to ban because things just turn into alcohol spontaneously.
Yeah, and it's medicinal. That's what
I'm always telling my wife. Yeah. Honey, I didn't mean to drink. It just happened spontaneously.
Yeah. I mean, making alcoholic beverages is so easy. I mean, it's just like, oh, I'm sorry, I left this apple juice in a big container for too long. I didn't mean anything, officer. All right, take it away, and then you start another batch the next day.
Yeah, I remember making my own wine actually in like 8th grade. It didn't turn out too well, but that was probably a me thing.
I homebrewed for a while. It was fun. Beer is a little harder, but doing like a wine, that's real easy. Very difficult to fuck up. Yeah,
to try that. But as it's getting ratified, William Jennings Bryan, who we mentioned, gives a speech, which I believe, Fred, you wanted to.
Yeah. So they're having a rally at a church to celebrate the moment that it comes into effect. And they're like, Brian, you get to make the speech the second it comes into effect. So, of course, he quotes the book of Matthew, and he says, they are dead that sought the young child's life. They are dead. They are dead. They are dead. And honestly, it's the best thing. Like, it's like the culmination to his life. He starts with the Cross of Gold speech, and then he gets this prohibition speech. And yeah, it's a nice way for him to kind of go out before he becomes gets mocked in the Scopes monkey trial.
Yeah. Good for him. The best speaker of his time, every historian will say. But there were a lot of different supporters of prohibition, as we mentioned. The IWW thought it was like a way to weaken and divide the working class. Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington thought it was bad for black people. There were a lot of hard right racist Southerners. Henry Ford eventually, Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, I guess they realized maybe this is not the most efficient thing for our workers to be hammered all of the time. So there is, much like eugenics, a lot of major people from across the political spectrum were kind of embracing this as the way to go.
One thing is for workers' compensation becomes a thing where, like, if your employees get injured, you have to pay for it. And then the factory owners are like, okay, well, we don't want them drinking anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's also, like, as we mentioned, Germans are very much at the forefront of the alcohol industry in the U.S. Bushwick in Brooklyn, if you go down Bushwick Avenue, there's mansions still to this day. Many of them are like run down, but they all used to be like German beer magnates who lived there. And they basically, Adolphus Busch had basically, you said, Fred, set it up like essentially McDonald's is today, the way he ran his beer operation.
But these are people who had been in the country for 70 years at this point.
Yeah. Right. America, I think, is like mostly German, if not like that's the largest plurality at this point or something like that. But like even despite that, World War I has totally anti-Germanified the consciousness, and I guess temperance kind of plays into that as well.
Yeah, they had a problem. A big problem is like they had an organization to like improve German-American relations and like try to keep us out of World War I. And obviously, once we went into World War I, no one wanted to hear from that, and that made them look really bad.
Right.
But also, everyone thinks this prohibition is only going to ban hard liquor.
Yeah.
And you also have like people who have been saving up, right? Because some people knew it was going to happen, especially rich people would stockpile booze, and some of them like got through the entire prohibition era without having to get more.
Yeah, the Yale Social Club for one.
Yeah.
Nice.
So the big thing is, then they do the Volstead Act in 1918, which is the actual rules, and they're a lot stricter than people thought they were going to be as far as the proof. So it bans anything below 0.5%, which I believe includes sauerkraut, which they probably like because that's another German thing.
Right.
If you had a non-alcoholic beer today, that would be banned under the Volstead Act. The Volstead Act takes a lot of people by surprise. I mean, there's these major brewers with major breweries set up all across America. They're still running the machinery until like they hear the news of the act. They got these massive batches of beer going. They're like, we didn't think we were going to be subject to this. What the fuck?
Yeah.
God. Yeah. I mean,
But there was still carve-outs for like personal use and spiritual use in the Volstead Act, right? And that's when you get all these people saying that they're rabbis.
Right. Yeah. So there's a carve out for religious use, and Manischewitz, alcohol is a part of Judaism, and so you have a lot of people saying that they're rabbis, even black people. Maybe that's how the Black Israelite phenomenon started. I don't know. But there were like conservative rabbis who were like, let's use grape juice. Reform conservative rabbis who were like, let's use grape juice.
Reform is more liberal with the changes. So they were willing to change, but the Orthodox were not.
Gotcha. Yeah.
They're like, God said we can have our wine.
Evangelicals said wine was in the Bible. Some of them use unfermented grape juice. Then the enforcement is kind of all over the place, because how do you do this? This kind of accelerated Jim Crow. They targeted poor whites as well. Women were often targeted, even if they were like selling alcohol or whatever, just to feed their children. And this led to the opening of the first women's federal prison. This is an issue of some contention. I mean, the Prohibition people say to this day, they're like, well, overall alcohol use went down, but most historians, it seems, would quibble with that point.
It was very easy to circumvent the regulations, and it was very open. Sort of like, okay, hey kids, are you listening to this podcast? Here's a trick that they don't want you to know. It's illegal for you to buy beer, but it is perfectly legal for you to buy all the ingredients and equipment for you to make beer.
Yeah.
This was the same in Prohibition. They would actually sell in like general stores, and like, you're starting to see like a couple of like major retailers show up. They would sell a full kit of like, here's how you make your own malted barley beverage. And then on the back of the package, it would say, now, whatever you do, don't do this. And then list the process for making it into beer.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Vanquished. If you want the full thing, because there is more, please go to patreon.com/thevanquished, where you can get the rest of this episode as well as our full episode catalog. You can support our work as well as annoy us in the comments.